Welcome to the Culture of You, meaningful dialogue with me and my favorite people. All right, everyone, welcome to the Culture of You. And today I have one of my favorite guests on here. She's never been on here, but she's on here today, and I know she's going to be one of my favorites. It is Jocelyn Armstrong, Esquire, people connector, JEDI, advocate. So that's justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion for those of you that don't know, podcaster, and one of my dearest friends. Welcome to the Culture of You. I'm so excited for this conversation today. Did I miss anything? How you doing? Welcome aboard.
I am well. Thank you for having me, Karen. You did not miss anything. That definitely hits all the marks and about who I am and how I show up, hopefully in many spaces.
I love that. All right, so we are going to jump right in because we got some big things to discuss. Just so we know, we are celebrating Black History Month. This is a February episode. It will air in February, and I think there's some reckoning and reconciling to do around being in, especially the profession of law and global conflicts, local legislation, state legislation, as well as federal legislation and things that are going on right now. And I can understand from a political elite adjacent space how that could be challenging. And so I just want to jump in real quick, get to know you a little bit, and then we're going to talk about some things that I think could be helpful for people that we know in our community. So, what is your vibe personally and professionally? If they're the same, great. If they're a little different, tell us the differences.
So, my vibe, personally and professionally, is trying to be a guide,
Mhm,
trying to be the person who finds the balance. For those folks who are into astrology, for instance, right? I was born in October, so I'm a Libra, right? So we spend a lot of time trying to find the balance in places and situations. And I laugh because it's like, right, also the symbol, if you will, for the law is scales, right? Again,
mhm,
talking about balance. And so what that means sometimes is one, we know that it is not always perfect equilibrium, right? It's not always perfectly balanced. But what can
mhm,
I do in the places that I'm in to either make people a little more aware, to help people feel more comfortable, to help people see something that they didn't think about before, right? So it's a balancing act all the time. And I like to be able to create spaces where even if people are like we don't agree, as long as it's not violent, as long as it's not dangerous, I like to be able to create places where people can have the conversations to pull out, okay, what don't we agree on? Why don't we agree? What does that really look like? What does that mean? So it
mhm.
means intentionality and meaningful conversations. And what I will tell you is it is not an easy thing, right? Because even when I sit in myself by myself, I get on my own nerves sometimes, right? So thinking through like, okay, this thing is happening. What does this feel like? Why does this feel this way?
Mhm.
Why do I think about this? Do I think about this differently than I did before? Am I
Yeah.
gonna act differently about it? But at the end of it all, I like peace. I know that sometimes peace has to come after some stuff.
Yeah.
Like looking at the
Right.
weather, right? It's been storming here and there and all that kind of stuff. But then after the storm is done, right, it's fine. And so it sounds sometimes I think wishy-washy to people or like maybe unsettled, but that's not what it is. It's more about in seeking to find that balance, you got to walk through some stuff that doesn't always make sense all the time, or you got to walk through it in a way where it looks uneven or unbalanced on one side, but then you keep moving forward and you see, oh no, we're getting to a better place, or we're getting
Mhm,
to some sort of understanding or disengagement. I mean, whatever that might be.
mhm. Yeah, I think I love what you said about the peace part because I am pro peace and all of that. But I think sometimes we conflate peace with an absence of ability to have generative conflict, nonviolent conflict, and say some hard things. And so I love that through line because that applies professionally and personally, absolutely. Because you got to have hard conversations with your friends sometimes too, especially if they want to remain friends. You do have to have
Exactly.
some of those hard conversations and get through some storms to the other side. What is the most challenging aspect, considering your identities? I don't want anyone to assume, but considering your identities, whatever you're willing to share, and your your profession and your longing for peace and community, What are the biggest challenges you faced in that?
So to help people not have to guess, I am a Black cisgender heterosexual woman. So those are my identities. I am
Mhm.
mostly able-bodied with the exception of the fact that I have to wear corrective lenses. Um, and for me though, in my profession, it's interesting because we talk about this. And when you are a Black woman who is a lawyer, I remind people often that this is a profession that when it was started, it was built around white men.
Mhm.
Those are the people that were lawyers and judges. And when we think about a woman like Arabella Mansfield, who was a white woman, but she was the first known woman to have passed the bar in the state of Iowa, and she had to sue the state so that she could practice law, even
Mm.
though she actually passed the exam, right? And then we think about Black folks who were lawyers, and we're talking about in the 1800s, not long after the Emancipation Proclamation and all of those things, some of these folks did what they had to do. And at that time, it was studying under someone who was an attorney and then taking an exam or studying under someone for a certain amount of time and then being able to be admitted to the bar after your apprenticeship ended. And they were people like John Mercer Langston and people like I'm blanking on some of the names right now, but I have a whole list of them. At any rate, they were not they were barely just past the point where folks wanted to act like they were people.
Mm.
Right? And so when they would show up, to courthouses and things, they weren't treated well. And even we look at like the American Bar Association, which is a national organization for lawyers, they had to have some reconciliation themselves about the fact that they did not allow Black people to be members of this professional association until well beyond its founding, to the point where
Right.
Black folks had to form the National Bar Association. And so when I think about that and I walk into rooms as a Black woman who is an attorney who does not practice in the courtroom anymore, but I remember those things. I remember the women who came before me and the Black folks who came before me and the Black women in particular
Mhm.
who came before me. And I'm like, one, there's still not a bunch of us, right? There's
Right.
still not a lot of us. And it's not for lack of trying. It feels very isolating sometimes because you walk into the room and you're the only one. Right?
Yeah.
Where you walk into the room and people are like, "Hey, how can we help you?" Hi, I'm a lawyer. I'm here to do a thing, right? And so it can be hard sometimes. There are ways that I think that we try to fill our cups and help each other. So where we live here in Central Ohio, periodically, there's a gathering of Black women attorneys.
Mm.
We get in this room and we don't do anything but catch up and see how you been, how your kids, how's your family, whatever, what hobby have you been getting into? Like literally just chilling. And sometimes it's 100 to 250 people,
Wow.
right? And
Mhm.
that's not everybody, but that's most of the bodies, which is also very startling. When you think about the fact that nationally, Black people make up about 5% of the population of attorneys.
Wow.
Yeah. So
2024. Wow.
2024, right, and then you look and we sometimes have, I think, particularly as Black women in this profession, we have that burden of exceptionalism,
Mhm.
right? Well, look at Ketanji Brown Jackson. Yes, I love that that woman is where she is sitting on the Supreme Court of the United States right now. The ways that she had to contort and jump through hoops to get there is wild, and she's an Ivy League educated person, right?
Mhm.
And but they will be, well, I mean, she's there. Okay, great. But then what about the person that's working in a small law firm somewhere, way down the street from DC?
Right.
How is that Black woman being treated in her office?
Mhm.
Right. So don't tell me that everything is awesome because you have this example, which is a wonderful example, because it doesn't translate down the street in somebody else's office, right? So it's
But it
hard.
also doesn't even, like, account for her what she has to experience there. I can't even imagine what she's experiencing current climate right now as a US Supreme Court justice.
I cannot imagine. And to be quite honest, especially in this current climate, but being real, that job is hard,
Yeah.
right? There's a lot of work that's involved in that job. You have people that report to you and staff that you have, and then you have to sit and figure out with your colleagues on that bench, you know, when they have to decide if they're even granting certiorari. Let me stop being super technical. If they're granting for a case to even come to be heard before them, right? They have to determine that as a body. And what
Mhm.
kind of conversations happen around that when they're discussing the merits of a case if it's something that they say should come before the Supreme Court, right? And then having to be in that space every day, all day, and then try to come home and be a human, right? After somebody has questioned your humanity all day long.
Whew.
Right,
Yeah.
so it's not easy, but at the same time, I brought up the example of, like, getting together with Black women lawyers, right? And then also having spaces and things that we do where we engage with people that we like, that we love, because you have to balance all that out, and I will not pretend that all is terrible, right? You know, I don't practice in the traditional sense. I work in a different kind of space and interact with lawyers all the time, right? These people are not nasty to me. They're not mean to me.
Hmm.
You know, sometimes you wonder about the folks that you see and you're like, "What do you really think about people like me when it's
Right.
time for you to go do something?" Right? But I know that there are a lot of folks who don't look like me in my profession who are doing the work every day of engaging with folks and representing people who are wildly different from them, who are often being, marginalized and attacked and whatever. So I know that there is good in the profession. I know that there are places that I can sit, rooms where I can say things that, were it not for the fact that I was a Black woman lawyer, people wouldn't listen.
Hmm.
And that's whether I'm in a professional space, if I'm at a community space where I am a board member, you know, all of these kinds of wonderful places where I get to sit. And because of the fact that Esquire is attached to my name, because I have a number that says I passed the state bar, people will open their ears differently. And so then that means I get that opportunity to say something on behalf of or about someone who is not in that room, or who, if they were in that room, would be overlooked because they don't have my credentials.
Right.
I I feel funny about it sometimes, but I said to someone the other day in a text message, I use my law license in my loud mouth sometimes because I know that it's helping somewhere.
We need you with the loud mouth and with that degree. We
Listen,
do.
listen. Well, because even sometimes, and it's funny because sometimes it's not even loud, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes just me being in the room and there'll be a conversation going on or something, or I'll ask a question or I'll raise an example because the lived experience I have, right?
Right.
Again, talking to another Black lawyer I know, and what I understand about, in some rooms, some people have relatives who maybe are not as well off as them, or who
Hmm.
may have experienced the criminal justice system, but they don't deal with them, right? So you don't know that. But for Black folks, right, we have a cousin or a church member
Somebody.
or a
Hmm.
neighbor, right? And we the only lawyer they know. So whether it's an employment issue, a divorce thing, a criminal case, a matter with their landlord or their homeowners association or the builder, I mean, whatever it is, they calling us first. And it's like, yo, wait, I don't know, right? But we interact with them. And so what happens is, because we have this education and sometimes some money, depending on where we work, but we're still only, a phone call removed from the jailhouse.
Right.
We're only a phone call removed from the friend or the relative who literally has lost a job and now has nothing because they was living for real paycheck to paycheck, right? So
Right.
what I say all that to say, when I'm sitting in some of these rooms and people are having these conversations, I will be like, "So did you think about this?"
Hmm.
It's not my experience personally, but I know it because I've seen it real close hand, right? So I'll ask the question, "Did you think about this?" Or, while we're talking about these words on a paper and these surveys that you did, let's talk about the people that are behind these
Hmm.
numbers. Let me give you an example of when I had, a cousin of mine that blah, 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 right? And then it helps people think like, oh, yeah, no. So like I'm, a person removed, at least in this professional sense, from somebody who literally was just at the jailhouse the other day. Okay, got it, right?
Right. Puts the things in a whole different perspective.
Yeah. And I like to add that context and perspective, not in an exploitative way or, like, oh, I'm so sad. No, not that. But I want you to think about this next time you say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Undoing bias, one situation and conversation at a time.
Listen.
The Lord's work, my friend. All
Oh,
right. So this is I dabble a little bit in journalism to some degree. And so this is a question that I have also been grappling with. And I just really wanted to hear how this impacts you in your profession and community building. It is notably in the journalism space, the age of misinformation and disinformation. And, how do you reconcile in specifically here with the law, how do you reconcile some of the things that you're seeing at a local level, at a state level, at a federal level, and also understanding that history? You're a practitioner, you're a JEDI practitioner. So like, how do you manage and reconcile and navigate all of the things you see coming back now, which many people have talked about as regression in terms of civil rights?
Mhm. I manage it carefully, right? First thing is I think about carefully because in as much as I'm a Jedi advocate, I also realize that running into the fire all the time, every time, is going to exhaust me and I'm gonna get burned. So like which days
Mm,
can I get in there and deal with that fire and which days am I supposed to be back there hooking the hose up to the truck, right? So
listen.
carefully. The other thing is I try to always make sure that I educate myself because in as much as I know a lot of things, I don't know all the things. So when
Mhm,
something comes up and I'm like, what now? I'm trying to go read about it and not necessarily from a particular news outlet, but what other access, what other tools, what other resources do I have to research? And sometimes it leads me to the library or my own bookshelf, or I may call someone and say, hey, you know about X, Y, and Z. Like, what can you tell me or where else should I be looking? So I try to educate myself first. And then if it comes to a space where it's time for me to say something or not, I think about what I'm going to say. And I think about if I am supposed to be the person even saying anything. Because I think sometimes there's a rush, and I feel like you and I might have talked about this before. There's a rush to say something. And I'm
mhm,
like, yeah, but what am I going to say? Like, will what I say make people think differently? Will what I say make people act differently or stop acting in a certain way? Right.
mhm,
So I approach it carefully. And it is not easy because when you think about, like you said, the regression of things as it relates to the ways that we've made strides with DEI and all of that. It is heartbreaking.
mhm.
It is hard to watch,
Yeah.
right? And I could be like, you know what? I'm gonna pack this little bag up and I'm gonna go back and start trying to figure out how to take cases and what have you.
Mm,
But I don't want to, right? Because I don't think that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to stay in this space. And I'm heartened by the times when I have these conversations or these training sessions with folks and people are still calling and asking for them. Because I'm like, so while over here on the one hand, you see constant legislation or crazy news stories and everything else about like why this should not be. And on the other hand, you've got people reaching out saying, but we need to know more. Point me to the bookshelf, point me to the documentary, point me to the something. So I'm like, so that means somewhere the people that really want it, there's more probably than we realize, but the loudest ones right now happen to be the ones who are not. Like it's heartbreaking when I look at certain legislation being passed and vetoed, then overwritten. Like here in Ohio,
mhm.
right, we talk about, for instance, access to medical care for transgender youth, right? I was like, now y'all passed it. The governors went and looked and was like, well, I talked to these people and I'm going to veto it. And y'all were like, no, because I've heard people say things like, well, no, people aren't. There's no such thing as transgender or, that's not real or they're doing X to these kids or whatever. And I'm like, but you not actually interacted with these folks. Or
Mhm.
maybe you have and you don't know that they're transgender. And guess what? Nothing harmed you in that interaction. But here you are trying to like act like these people don't exist. You're gonna pass this law, it's gonna make it dangerous and it's gonna block access, but the people are still here.
That's probably, as someone who is non-binary and gender fluid, that's definitely something that I think is challenging because, I mean, thankfully I pass in a lot of ways, to look, cis enough. And my experience is that of a Black woman. Like that's my lived experience. That's how I've been treated in the world since I was born.
Mhm,
But even being, out and in queer organizations and coming from those histories for myself, I think that the biggest challenge is that, like, just because you don't like something or believe it is possible doesn't mean it gets to not exist. Like these people, we still exist. Like I exist. And it's one of those things where it's like, what are we even talking about? Because if we didn't exist, then would there need to be laws against us? You know what I'm saying? Like it's like some literal deductive logic that's not in place.
And
And
why are we making laws against people, right? Like, why are we making laws against people? Why is it that when this country was founded and it was like, well, the only people that should vote are white men who are landowners? Okay, whatever. But there's all these other people that are already here, and you brought all these other folks here, and then you're like, okay, well, listen, the black men can vote, but their vote is only going to count for a certain percentage. Okay, that's weird, but whatever. Like, why is it that we're incrementally trying to give people access to things, and then we do it, but now we're at a place where we're trying to scale it back. But for why? Like, why are you trying to make laws about or trying to eradicate people? It doesn't make sense to me, right? And when I think about how laws are made and understanding that a lot of laws when they were written, particularly early days of this country, were not written with me in mind,
right.
even though somebody who looked like me probably was walking around somewhere doing something, breathing air and taking up space for sure.
And caring for them in
Yeah,
some way.
yeah.
Hmm.
But you wrote this law without somebody like me in mind. Well, now I'm here. I don't go away. I'm not disappearing because you wrote something else on another piece of paper. So how
Hmm.
can we figure out how to deal with each other? Because I was with some folks last week and somebody said, if people just minded their business, it would be fine. Right? Because what is my existence or what is your existence really taking away from somebody? Like there's no finite amount of air. So because I'm breathing or you're breathing, that doesn't mean somebody else doesn't get to breathe,
Hmm.
right? You having a job doesn't prevent somebody else from having a job. Why? Because I know what you do for work and I know what I do for work. And some of the people who would say that I'm not supposed to be there can't do what I do.
Right.
Can do what you do, right? So it boggles my mind. It frustrates me, right? But then what I understand is that society continues to evolve. And so while it looks like we are devolving and regressing right now,
Hmm.
I also realize there are people who are constantly like, nah, we ain't just gonna lay down and be like, never mind.
Right.
So we're not going back. As much as you try to take it back, we're not going back. We're just gonna keep fussing and fighting. And for what? Now folks are just exhausted.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And that's, I think to that point, there is a goal that, exhaustion is violence.
Mhm. Mhm.
That lack of access to resources and needs is violence.
Mhm.
And there is that, theory around replacement theory. But I think when you look at the statistics, civil rights really started to move 50s, 60s, right? So you see Martin Luther King and you see Malcolm X, and you see those movements really start to move. And then, of course, Martin Luther King was assassinated. And of course, that was when he started to talk more, not militantly, but to talk more about anti-militarism,
Mhm.
anti-capitalism, and anti-poverty, right? And when you think about those things, and like, oh, they were like, nah, you got to get out of here. Like, we understand it was like, nah, you got to get out of here. But this was not 100 years ago. This was 70 years ago. My dad is, in similar age to Martin Luther King, and he's with us. And I talked to him, I just talked to him
Mhm.
yesterday. And when I think about the fact that how quick that window was, it was like, okay, affirmative action. It was, voting rights for Black women eventually. That's a whole nother podcast, but
Oh my.
eventually.
Oh my.
Uh and that's a whole nother podcast. But like if you think about all the steps that were made in progress,
Mhm.
it did not take even a generation
Mm-mm.
to grow up. It took one generation to grow up and say, no, we will not be replaced. And we're going to put, like, when you think of the timeline and hundreds of years of enslavement, and then you go into that civil rights period, a glorious time
Mhm.
at the end of it, not during, right?
Mhm.
Because we were subjected to a lot. Not even a generation later, we have people whose grandparents were slave owners,
Yeah.
and especially those that are like 60, 70, 80 right now that are in power.
Mhm.
it baffles me, and it's one of those things that I really have to try and rein in, emotionally, because it feels like, with the new diagnosis of autism for me last year, it feels like so unfair, and I just keep waiting for karma, universe, God to do something to right the scales, and all I see is a further expansion of those injustices and like those ideals, and the scales tip
Mhm.
towards the oppressor. And it is I guess I could say it's a mind fuck is probably
Yeah.
the best word I
Yeah.
could use for that.
Yeah. And and it makes me wonder. I think about that because when you think about, you're talking about like the period of the civil rights movement and all of those things, and I think about what they did with what they had.
Mhm.
Right, these folks didn't have a lot, and they had mimeograph machines and word of mouth and party
Mhm.
line telephones, and
Liars.
and somehow they got it done, right? And so, how much more are we able to do in the age where I can pick up my phone and immediately send a message to my cousin in California, right? These kinds of things. So we have better connectivity, at least in that way. So that is some of the thing that excites me. And I agree with you though, that heaviness of like, how long, this is me as a church kid thinking about like the children of Israel, right? And like, how long are these people supposed to be oppressed, Lord? Like, here we go. What are we doing? How long are the people going to get away with treating folks crazy? How long is this violence going to continue against people? How long? How long? And you know that there's an end to it because, like you said, that karmic, that reaping what you sow, whatever it is coming. But it feels wild, and it's like, will I ever get to see it? Right? Like I think about, you mentioned MLK, and I think about his mountaintop speech
Mhm.
when he talks about, I might not get there with you. And for those who are biblical scholars, they'll, connect that to, Moses in the Bible. Moses did all the work and set the stuff up. And he died before they got to see the promise. And I'm like, is that where I'm sitting? Like, am I going to be like doing all this teaching and training and
Same.
learning? And then like, I'm not going to see, it's not going to happen in my lifetime. I don't know. Right.
Mhm.
And is that so bad? Like, I don't love what the things that are happening right now, but does it mean it'll be better for my nieces and nephews and other kids and stuff? It feels weird. Like you said, it feels weird to be thinking like I'm doing all this to try to make something better and I might not see.
Yeah.
It's
We had the
stark.
conversation today, me and Aaron, about if there's war on our soil,
Mm,
and there's lots of conspiracy theories, but like, would we even know how to do it, because America has been such an exceptionalist country, and I don't think that people, like, from what I see, like, we and you know about Project 2025.
mhm.
Right, and if anybody's interested, make sure you have a lot of spoons, but it is pretty much the explanation of why we're seeing all this legislation that is anti-Black, anti, DEI, anti-woke, if you will, and also anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ. Um, Take your time with it and, get some good friends around for afterwards, but, like, we see all of these things happening and it's clear, and they're telling us, like, you can go to some of the outlets, people who are against diversity and inclusion and any kind of equity, of course, even though their people stole some things. When we have people that are doing that, and we are trying to have that conversation with people in power, I think there is this denial and state of disbelief, and people can't believe that there are evil people, and I'm like, how can we not believe that there are evil folks that are descendants of slave owners? Like, what is so hard to believe that those slave owners' grandkids are trying to eliminate people off the face or eradicate whole demographics of people?
Yeah.
And so we don't have any movement that is, and this is not to be like a political speech, but like, we don't have any movement that is unified, that is similar messaging, because people don't even believe that what's happening is happening.
Because it's something that they wouldn't do, so they just kind of project and think, well, nobody did. No, people do that because even when we look beyond our own country, there are things happening to people around the globe because somebody is deciding to be violent,
Mhm,
to be evil, right? Like,
mhm,
That is what that is. And so, yeah, not everybody's evil. No, we know that. That's just a thing. But just because I wouldn't do something, when I hear that somebody does something like what I would be considered completely beyond the pale of what is acceptable,
Mhm.
I'm not surprised.
No.
No, I wouldn't do it, but I know somewhere there's somebody who thinks that is acceptable behavior. And what do we do? Like you said, how do we get people to understand that just because you wouldn't do it doesn't mean that it's not a thing, and doesn't
Mhm.
mean that it's not a thing that you should either prepare for or try to act against,
Right.
right? Like it happened, and some of it is because I don't know actually. I can't even pretend like I know why people
Right.
are that evil. I don't know if it is inherent or if there is some sort of shifting in their whatever. I don't know, but I know you see it, and I
Mhm.
know when I see it.
Right.
There's no reason
Whew.
I can't remember what state it is now. Ugh, I just saw the story the other day, but they were voting on like making some sort of school food thing available for kids. And somebody was quoted as saying, like, I know it's the thing that we're supposed to do, but it's gonna cost too much money. So I had to vote against it.
But the children. But then it's
But
like
the
you
children.
want you want to they want to bring up, abortion rights and
Mhm.
reproductive rights and then take that same stance and be like, but that's why we should make you have the children regardless of how you became inseminated.
You ain't gonna be able to feed them or nothing, but that's fine. Bring them on in
We'll
here.
cross that bridge when we get there.
Right. And I think that's part
Like,
of the thing too. Like people, I don't understand the lack of long range thinking. You cannot think ahead and plan everything. Like you cannot plan everything to the minute, right? But you
mhm,
got to know that if somebody has a kid, there's got to be food and diapers. There's got to be housing and a bed, right? This is just kind of how that works.
yes,
So, and it's not. It's very interesting to me that people try to pretend like like for instance the abortion issue. People try to pretend like these folks are being irresponsible. That's not always the case, right? That is not somebody being irresponsible. It's that, hey, guess what? I am actually pregnant and I am actually married to the person that I'm pregnant by or person that I've chosen to have kids with whatever version. But now you're questioning me being able to not have this kid because we have realized that I might die or the
right.
child is already almost dead inside the body. But now you don't want to let nobody have access to not only abortion, but also the other medical procedures that would help them not have to carry a carcass around their body.
Let me tell you this, Project 2025 doesn't care about that. The whole point is to increase and become the majority again for white folks, even though they're majority still in this country. The goal is to make sure that white women aren't getting abortions.
It's wild.
And so the thing about that is so hard for me is not quite understanding, like not understanding the abortion issue. I think I did some debate stuff in college or high school or something, and I got given a side, and then I had to make an argument. Like I can do that without an emotional charge as
Mhm,
someone who could become pregnant at some point, right? Like I could do that without an emotional charge on either side and debate. Like
mhm,
that's actually fun for me. But when we start talking about, like you said, people dying and the maternal rate and the maternity rate in terms of Black babies dying 5 to 1 to their
yeah,
white counterparts, you know what I mean, of the children that are Black coming through passing away versus one white child that
yeah,
comes through and passes away. So really, I don't think they're really that worried about us. I'm just trying to be honest here. I don't think there's that much of a concern because they're like, we got like what we saw happen in Gaza was that, I think it was 300,000 babies were born prematurely or died um, in utero, and so that maternity rate just like in 3 months shifted so significantly that I was like, oh, that is a microcosm of what has happened over 400 years to
mhm,
Black women.
mhm,
The same systemic things. You take away housing, you take away food, you take away safety, you take away, and then you add trauma, like unmitigated trauma, right,
mhm,
in a space. And most 70% of the people passing away are being killed in Gaza are um, women and children, right? So when you think about those things and those statistics, and you see America and you see Black women having that mortality rate for infants, like the math is actually mathing,
Yeah.
and it's like, how can we I don't want to argue with anybody about whether it's those statistics are real or those statistics happen. That's where I get challenged, I think, the most as an educator and as a one-to-one and a community builder, is the fact that, like, I'm not going to argue. Like, we could go to organizations in Central Ohio right now that would have all the data that we would need, and I don't
Yep.
even have to make this speech. Like, that's not my area of expertise. I don't have to make that speech. But at the end of the day, people will sit and argue about sometimes how it's Black people's fault, their own fault, and that's just not like, if you look at any of the writings of Huey P. Newton or Martin Luther King Jr. or Malcolm X, like none of that is like, do you blame the person in the hospital that got hit by a car? Do you blame them for being in the hospital? Right? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like,
Yeah.
that's just not, you don't ever blame the oppressed. Like, is it the responsibility of the oppressed to get themselves out of oppression? Well, now we have to take up, protests and all the different subversive ways of civic engagement that many people have. And then we're named and labeled as many things there too. But it's just this cyclical thing. And it can be devastating. But I'm just, my hope for this year, as it's an election year, is that people become engaged. People start finding, and this is where you come in very handy. And so this is why I wanted to put you on here in February so people know. So sorry if your inbox blows up. Thank you for your service. But so people know that there are ways to get civically engaged, as
Yeah.
many ways as we can have this conversation. I'm not going to tell people how to vote. If they ask me, I'm going to tell them I'm going to vote my conscience. And I hope you understand why I vote. And I can have a conversation with somebody about who I'm voting for and why. No problems. But to be not civically engaged, or to not listen or even turn your head when young voters are saying things, to me that feels irresponsible. And I know that we're going to do our job to keep pushing resources and connection and conversations into the space so that people will get civically engaged. And so
Absolutely.
how are your conversations going?
So I am sometimes in a bubble, right? And even for people who wouldn't necessarily vote the same way that I would, we all know we voting, right?
Mhm,
And I know that there's a lot of frustration, and people are like, I haven't seen anything change, and why should I vote, and what have you. And we talk about being civically engaged. So one, that means voting, but two, that also means to know what you're voting about,
mhm,
to be very aware of what's going on in your own community. I've been an active and registered voter since I was 17 years old, because of the fact that, right, I got to register when I was 17 because I was a high school student who turned 18 in October, right before the November
mhm,
election, right? So couldn't wait to fill out my voter registration card, because that was something that I learned from my mother,
mhm,
my other elders, my grandmother, who did not even go to the polls, but always better made sure they got to her that absentee ballot, right? Like, these are
mhm,
things, my mother, who was born with a visual impairment, and who, after she retired, was out canvassing with one of my cousins. I was like, "What are y'all doing?" Like, these elderly ladies walking the street, knocking doors, right? Or, setting up
mhm,
stuff for the canvassers. So that's the kind of background that I come from, right? And it was always knowing what you were supposed to be voting for. So reading this stuff before you even get into the voting booth, listening to what people are saying for real, like, not the commercials, but like, if you have an opportunity to go to their website or listen to them in a debate or engage with them in a public space, right? And helping people understand the importance of not just, we get very excited and fired up around the national elections, and that is an important part of the process. But what we also know is that the federal level does not move with any rapidity or speed,
I love that. That's
right?
like the nicest way to say,
Listen,
like,
they ain't doing nothing. But at the same time, right, but you have state legislators and you have local elections, right? One of my favorite example, and I harp on this on social media and I say it to people all the time. As a person who's a lawyer, I understand the importance of judicial elections.
Mhm.
Because yes, you can vote for the president every 4 years, but you also have to vote for judges. They tend to have 6-year terms, unless, somebody retires, what have you. But, like, you're not gonna meet the president. The stuff that gets to the president's desk to sign, by the time it impacts your life, they've been working on that for years.
You're
But I
probably in the ground too.
yes, but I bet you if you go to a courthouse on a Monday morning at 9 o'clock, by the time noon hits and you going to get a sandwich for lunch, something about your life has changed.
Wow.
If
Yep.
you think about it, if you get a speeding ticket and you decide to, petition that speeding ticket and you're gonna fight it because you don't want those points on your license, right? You show for
Mhm.
that court date, all this stuff could take 5, 20 minutes, right? It's not, or you're gonna get divorced, or you're suing somebody because, they damaged your business, whatever the case may be. That judge has more influence over your life in a matter of minutes, hours, or weeks than
Mhm.
somebody sitting at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Your city council in most cities have weekly meetings. So by the time they wrap their meeting, they didn't change when your trash is picking up, whatever the
Mhm.
case be, how much, tax abatement is available for this thing that's getting built down the street from your house. Your county commissioners are meeting on a regular basis. Do you know what they do? Because
Mhm.
again, the decisions they make have a very immediate impact on your life. So I'm not saying don't vote in the presidential election. What I'm also saying is pay very close attention to the things that are happening right in your own backyard, literally.
Mhm.
And beyond, and so maybe when we think about, there's a spectrum too for me for civic engagement, right? For some people, it is they just going to vote. So they educate themselves, they cast their vote, and we'll see them again next year. That's their jam. For some people, it means that they are going to pass out literature for their favorite issue or their favorite candidate. I have been a poll worker before. It is a long, thankless day, and
Okay.
I really just stand there smiling at folks, right? But there I was,
Thanks for
right?
answering
Because
that
what was I?
question because I've thought about it and I'm like, mm.
Listen, it's long, but here's the thing. I wasn't doing anything especially, fancy, right? I was there in case somebody needed a paper ballot, and I had to make sure they got hold of that, right? I was
Mhm.
smiling at people as they come in the door. It's a very small thing, but when we think about the average poll worker, most of those folks are retired people because they have time. Well, I
Mhm.
happen to just decide to take a day off of work,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? And so I knew how to use the machines. I knew, these kinds of things, but like maybe that's your level of civic engagement, right? Maybe you're the person that in addition to being an avid voter, you are going out to educate other people, not just canvassing, but you are hosting a town hall, or you are hosting a coffee chat at your house with your friends, or y'all are doing a wind down conversation about what the issues are, or you're joining one of the organizations that is very involved in trying to put people on the ballot and trying to get issues before the legislature. Like there are so many ways that you can get involved and it can align with who you are as a person. There is no one way. I enjoy, the work that Martin Luther King did. I love reading about the things the Black Panthers did and, things that happened during the women's liberation movements and during, learning about stuff that happened during Stonewall, like all these things, right? I'm not trying to be Martin Luther King. I'm just trying to make sure somebody knows something they didn't know before.
Right.
Right? That's it. And
Before
so
history gets rewritten, we need to share
right.
the stories.
But that's a part of civic, it's so funny because, like, so being an attorney and having friends who run for judge, I don't put myself in the front of those
Mhm.
spaces. I don't put my name on stuff. I don't none of that. Right? Because and not because I know these people and I know that they are great and will be great at what they do. But sometimes people try to make a thing. And because of where I work, they would try to say something wild about, well, what is no, that's not even you're weird, right? So I stay out the way because I don't want any made up attention, right? But so what does that mean? That means if my friend who's running for judge needs a babysitter, right? I go babysit. That to me, that's civic engagement, right? Because they got to be out there.
Mhm.
If they need somebody to run an errand, because life is just life, and in this time and something's crazy, I'm gonna run the errand, right?
Right.
I'm still gonna vote, but I'm not engaging myself in trying to tell people to vote for them or anything like that because I shouldn't. If somebody asks me who they are, I'll tell them, right? And I'll tell them
Right.
honestly, right? But I'm not necessarily gonna be out there in front of that crowd with a megaphone.
Yeah, the campaign is enough, really,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think there's some strategic alignment that can happen.
Mhm.
Um, I know people in office, and like you said, I think the most helpful thing can be like, "How can I support you? Here's a lunch on me," or, like, "Here's $20," or,
Mhm.
"Here's $100, get your staff,"
Yeah.
some stuff because or if they even have staff, but, like, people are the campaign, Erin has gone through it, and I wasn't with her. I don't know if we woulda made it. I wasn't with her when she, ran, but, like,
Mhm.
I just know how exhausting and beginning of day, like, open your eyes to closing your eyes
Mhm.
and all that time in between, there's so much happening around that, and so, if you have people and I think there's also some challenge about people wanting to get into politics because of the distrust of the government, and
Mm.
I can't fault you for that. I personally will not run. My autism will get me eaten up alive because I can't always see the malintent. I can't always see that. And so
Mhm.
I'm pretty trusting and I have really, really wonderful and discerning people around me. I'm learning differently based on lived experience and being taken advantage of what that looks like. But I think it would eat me alive and I don't have the capacity for that. Like I don't know what I would be able to accomplish because I'd be, you know, dealing with that. But I think there's also really good questions about what it means to get involved and be something different? Are you like a one-term person that goes in there? Because I have people, if anybody's listening right now or watching right now and they want to get involved, I know people that can help you get involved, but I think sometimes also we're seeing people get in there and then realizing what a juggernaut that system is and
Mhm.
and how many things they actually can't change on the initial. And I do wish people understood how limited folks can be when they do get into an elected position.
Yep. Because there like you said, there's ways now that you can't talk about certain things or places that you can't be that you would probably have shown up before
Mhm,
because of your public office, right? And I think about that. I feel like there's often ways that we don't realize that we can make change and we can make difference in the spaces that we already sit. And we have
mhm,
way more latitude to move around and
mhm,
get some stuff done because we're not beholden to a specific office that limits what we can do. And then if we do that thing, now we've lost that space. Right.
mhm.
So I'm like you, I'm like, And people said to me, you should run because I'm like, y'all understand I'm charismatic and people like me and that's cool. And I mostly like people. But that is not enough to sustain in that space. And it takes more. And I'm not built for, being out
Mm-mm.
here on the road raising funds and glad handing and all of that. And then by the time I get to where I'm trying to go, if I was to get elected, like you said, now I'm limited to what I can do. And you calling me for a favor, and I can't even make that thing happen because that's not a part of my job. All these things. I'm like, let me stay over here so I can
Yeah,
make
it's
sure.
actually more,
Yeah.
at times, more influence.
Yeah. Yeah.
In my experience, I've been
Yeah.
able to have the conversations and, um, really have some honest conversations and dialogue because I am not beholden to anyone or any name. I'm coming representing myself.
Mhm.
Yeah, for
Yep.
sure.
And that's not to say that people should not run. Like if folks have a burning desire, they absolutely should. But if that is not your jam, don't feel guilty if that's not the way that you are engaging. Find what
Mm.
works for you and make your change that way.
Okay, so while we're on this message of ways that people can get involved and civically engaged, community, um, just civically engaged, really, are there any other simple hacks that you have about how to get involved and what to do?
So I call myself the $20 philanthropist. I've been saying that for a long time. I've been blessed that it's a little more than $20 these days. But right, you talked about movements need money because they
So
have to
much
pay
money.
staff, they have to put, folks in places to get stuff done. They have to be able to move people around the country. Like movements need money. And so I have selected certain things that I think are important, certain organizations that I think are important that I know are doing the day-to-day on the ground movement work, and I send them a little something every month. It's not about to buy nobody no jet, because I ain't got that. But I
Right.
have chosen wisely and I spread my money out that way. So things like Equality Ohio, I give a monthly donation there because whether they buy a book of stamps or some coffee for the office, okay,
Need it.
right? They need
Need
it.
it.
The Poor People's Campaign, which is, like a new version of what MLK and those
Mhm.
folks started, is run by Liz Theo Harris and Reverend Dr. William Barber. I run
Mhm.
them a couple dollars every month because they are literally moving people to locations and doing actual physical marches and these things.
Mhm.
Again, I don't know what that little bit of money do for them, but I do because I read my newsletters, right? So I'm not, but I know
Right.
that I'm doing it, somebody else is, right? So these are things. I'm on the board for a school with children on the autism spectrum,
Mhm.
and I know the lights got to stay on there. I know, you know what I'm saying? So in addition to being on the board, a little monthly donation runs there. I go to a church here in town. And I know not everybody goes to church, but one thing that I appreciate about the church that I am a member of, okay, so I go on YouTube, but whatever. The thing that I enjoy about the church that I'm a member of is that there is a community component that is very important. There is a weekly meal that people are fed, no matter where they come from. If they show up when the doors are open to get that plate, they get a plate. And there is a food pantry that if somebody shows up and they need some groceries, they get some groceries. That's got to get paid for some kind of way.
Mhm.
Right? So those are the ways that I'm like, I spend my money in places I know it's gonna help folks.
Mhm.
And again, I ain't got billions of dollars to get nobody, but I know that that little bit that I give is doing something. In as much as the money piece is the helping people understand something. I said to someone the other day, I'm always having these conversations because I'm always somewhere.
Mhm.
And, I was talking to, a friend of one of my relatives and trying to help them understand who they would need to call for a particular legal matter. They don't even live in this city.
Mhm.
Um, and I said to her, well, she was like, I appreciate you, like calling me in the evening and walking through this and da da da. I said, I'm like a translator.
Mhm.
People who don't interact with the court system don't know what's happening, and
Nope.
it freaks them out.
Correct.
Right? And so if I can say, this is who you need to call, this is possibly what might happen when you get there on that day. Okay. And so similarly, so talking about that in the civic space, right? Not just somebody going to the courtroom, but in the civic space. Oh, you've never voted before? Well, here's what it'll probably look like when you go. Da 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 da. Oh, you're thinking about X? Okay, well, here's what I know about, or here's the resources that I can point you to that you said you want to learn more about blah 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 bill, right? Or such and such. Even the place where I work put together a toolkit for people to
Mhm.
help figure out how to get down to the state house and how to engage with their state representatives when they get there.
Mhm.
We don't know what folks are gonna be going down there to talk about, not our business. Here's your toolkit.
Yeah.
This is how you get in there, right? Those are the kinds of things I enjoy, helping people connect to where they need to be. That's what
It's
I do.
so necessary. It's so
Yeah.
necessary. It's like
Oh,
the subversive, the subversive Underground Railroad work. It's like those connective networks
yeah.
that get people what they need and sends them to who they need to talk to get the support that they need.
Because what would it do me to know a thing and know somebody needs to know it, especially if they're asking me specifically?
Mhm.
If I know it, what harm will it be for me to tell them?
Mm.
If somebody stops me on the street and they're like, "Hey, I need to figure out how to get to the Columbus Museum of Art." Oh, listen, you go down such and such, turn on Broad Street, right? Like,
Mhm.
what did they need to know how to get to the museum? I mean, that's a very frivolous example, but what did it take me but a couple of minutes to tell them some directions? Why would I not?
Mm. We've gotten really insular, and I think the community mindset, um, people over profit or community over everything, right?
Mhm,
Like those concepts are stated, and there are some people that walk that, but I also think that everybody has a point of loss for
mhm,
themselves in terms of how much they will be with the group,
Mhm.
and then at what point they will take themselves out of that conversation as to not lose, I don't know, social capital, standing, their income, like all of those things. I think we all do have to have that
Yeah.
in some way around survival. And so I think what we're seeing is like the tension between the notion, which is a altruistic notion, is that the community can care for each other. And we have got some folks in the community that have some really challenging situations ahead of them and things going on, myself included. Like, I mean, I'm a caretaker for my father. You know what I mean? Like, he's
Mhm.
sick. It's not like any of us are exempt from it just because we have a little job and a little bit of money or whatever. But it's
Right. Right.
like none of us are exempt. And so the last thing I want to talk about is joy, and where you find your moments of joy, the things you like to do. We could take that Esquire, we could just boop, we could do that right over there. We'll put that down over there. And what does Jocelyn like to do? How do you connect daily, if possible, to your joy, to your regulated nervous system, to your health? How are you doing there?
So I'm glad you said we popped the Esquire over there because that is my job. That is not who I am. I have so
Hmm.
many other fun things that I enjoy, right? I'm a music person.
Yes.
So most of the day, especially when I'm working, there's music playing. And whether I'm streaming it from my phone or one of these little
Hmm.
smart devices, there's music. And music is something that brings me joy. It helps me get settled. I have different music for different things. So if I'm trying to concentrate, I got to put on a little jazz or a little
Hmm.
classical. If I'm
Yep.
trying to feel upbeat, it means I have to pull out Stevie Wonder or some 90s hip hop, right? So music is a thing. Being connected to people. And I was at a friend's house last night, having dinner, watching basketball, having a good time hanging out. And I thought about, my intentionality of spending time with people that I enjoy. And whether I've known them for a real long time or a little time or whatever, there's just people that I like having a meal with somebody
Hmm.
is a good way to revive. I yesterday was a funny day because like I had a hair appointment and I saw somebody I hadn't seen in a long time. We both happened to be in at the same time getting our hair done. We talked about her shoes and I found out where I can get them because she told me, well,
Hmm.
this I got 'em, da, 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 little stuff like that, right? And then I had a friend that I've known for years that I grew up with that was in town for something, and she did me a solid and stopped at my mom's house to pick up something that I left for Christmas, and we chatted for like 10 minutes and we hugged, right? And she
Hmm.
ran off to her thing and I went off to my thing, and that was it felt so good, right? That
Hmm.
quick little exchange. And so that my connections to people are important. Bourbon, chocolate, coffee are things that I enjoy,
Check,
right?
check, check.
Listen, reading, I try to get my exercise in, watching frivolous television shows, like, those are the
Yes.
ways that I find my joy, right? This is what I do, and when the weather's better, getting outside, get some
Hmm.
of that fresh air. Even, like, I mean, and it is the little simplest things. When I was out running around yesterday, I was back and forth between home, and the kids on the block were playing outside. And these little kids riding their bikes and doing whatever they do, and there's one and I don't know, like, the kids that live right next to me, I know them better, and there's one little child across the street, but some of these other kids down the street, whenever I see these kids, they wave at me, whether I'm walking, whether I'm driving, whatever it is, like, and I don't spend a lot of time with them, it's not my children, but they see me, they know me as that lady down the street, and they always wave, and they always make sure and I wave back. Right,
Vigorously.
and this is it, but that is such a little tiny spark of joy for me because these kids see me as somebody they wanna speak to,
Mhm.
they see me as a safe adult in their community, right?
Yeah, because
And
they
it's
wouldn't talk to you if they didn't.
listen,
They
listen, and
would
they're
not.
in the middle of playing, but they see my car go past and they're like, "Ah, it's Jocelyn," right? And it's
Mhm.
just like so it's stuff like that, but a lot of it is rooted in music and my connection to people.
I love
And
that.
my ability also sometimes just sit and stare at the wall. That is also a beautiful thing.
That is a gift. That is like inner peace. What is that,
Li
Kung Fu Panda? That
listen,
is that inner peace where you can stare at a wall and be fine.
be fine. A good little nap ain't never hurt nobody.
I want more moments of that.
Yeah.
staring at the wall without all the lists, you know?
Yeah.
Mm,
It takes practice to try to shut off your mind and just sit there and look.
it
It's hard.
really does.
Yeah.
And I definitely appreciate, our connection, and
Mm.
whether we're recording or not, I am always happy to spend time with you. And so this is the fun part where I get to flip the script, and you're a podcaster. So like this isn't like mm, for you, it's no big deal, NBD. But I do want to give you the chance to put me in a hot seat
Mhm.
and either give me a scenario of
Mhm.
something that you want to see how I would have processed through it or moved through it, and we can talk about what you actually did, afterwards. Or
Mhm.
you can just ask me a question. Really, whatever you want. You're in the hot seat. You're the host now for a moment. So, do what you want to do.
So this is gonna be a question,
Okay.
and the question is going to require a little bit of future thinking, and not in a morbid way, but when your time on this earth is done and
Mhm.
you've done all the things you were supposed to do, what do you want people to say about who Karen was?
Man. The good news is I think about this all the time. Um,
I did not know that. Okay.
yeah, like I have a lot of existential spiraling. I'm a poet, you know what I mean? I'm always thinking about my integrity, who I am as an artist, especially. Um, I have this, pretty thriving professional career. And Friday I got to do some improv with some really dynamic people. And the thing I love about improv, people are like, why don't you do stand up? And I'm like, I'm a DEI practitioner. There's not a lot of material for me. And also, I'm a safe space. So people tell me their secrets. I don't know what material you want me to use, but that's off limits, right?
Mhm.
So when I walk in the room, this is a feeling that I love. And I love the quote from Maya Angelou about, people won't remember blah, 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 blah. They'll remember how you made them feel.
Yeah.
And when I walk into spaces where people have no idea what I do professionally, they know that I come here and I'm kind of funny and I'm easy to work with. And they're like, "What's up?" And they might be like, "Hey, Karen," or "What's up, Black Karen," or whatever. They joke around, but they don't know me to be this. They just know me to be one of them.
Mhm.
And I like that feeling. I like that feeling of I always want to be viewed as one with,
Mhm.
like to be able to be a person that is able to sit with people, connect with people, hold the space.
Mhm.
And my hope is that between holding space and providing empathy and compassion that I've often wished I had for myself. So that's
Mhm.
also a practice in making sure I heal myself in those ways. I would want people to think when they think of Karen, me, Karen Hewitt, um, that they were met for whatever time that was. I have, you know, in terms of legacy, like actual legacy, I have the books. I have the writings and the articles. I have the magazine articles. Like I have the features, like my body of work,
Mhm.
it will speak for itself. And those were just me trying to heal and then sharing because people have told me that those words were inspiration. So if I inspired someone to heal, if I inspired someone to rest, if I inspired someone to take care of themselves and love themselves and be more gentle with themselves and others, if I inspire people to go on one more day and to share their talents and to be themselves authentically, that if I did that for one person, and I know I have, then that would make it worth it. And so one more person or one more person. And that's how I want to leave this earth. I want to leave this earth having impacted the folks that I connected to and them being able to find themselves too.
I like that.
Mm.
Yeah.
I haven't articulated those thoughts because they normally stay in my head. So that was interesting to say them out loud.
Mhm.
Great question.
Listen,
Great
sometimes I
question.
come up with good ones.
That's a good one. All right. So heading out, we're gonna be in Black History Month, and then the next month is Women's History Month. And the federal theme, do you know the federal theme
I do for Black History Month,
for
or
Women's History Month?
I haven't looked that one up yet. I know the one for
Okay,
Black
so
History
it's
Month.
by having us both on here, it's kind of a twofer
Yes,
for February and March.
I love it.
And I don't really, you know, roll out my episodes. I roll them out when I can.
Mhm.
And so I'm not like, oh, in 2 weeks we're gonna have two people. I don't know. So Women's History Month, the federal theme is women in diversity, equity, inclusion, with influence in diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Oh, talk about that
That's gonna
impact.
be interesting. It's gonna be an interesting March with
Yeah.
news and all that stuff. And I do some comms, and I'm glad that I'm in a private owned situation.
Mhm,
But I'll
mhm.
be interested to see what that does, because in the back of my mind, I'm also like concerned because we're going to amplify all these names of women that are
Yeah,
influential in DEI, and there's an outright attack against DEI right now. And
yeah,
so that I'm also like protective of my people and women
absolutely.
in there. And so take care of yourself. But I did get like a twofer in that. Anything you want to say to anybody around those themes, Black History Month, March, it could be funny, but any last messages that you have for folks as we head into you know performance and some things on some shelves that will be like cool capitalists, but like for Women's History Month and Black History Month, how you feeling? Anything?
So it's funny that you asked this because I've already dropped my Black History Month episode.
Oh yeah, I gotta go
Yeah.
listen to
Yeah.
that.
And I'm recording the Women's History Month soon. But it's funny because when you talked about Black History Month, the theme for that was about, like celebrating the arts and artists,
African
right?
Americans in the arts, yeah.
Yeah. And so I always try to encourage people to learn about folks. And the reason I say that is, I don't want you also to just focus on your favorites, right? Because a lot of us, we're in the season of like the NFL, Super Bowl is coming and
Hmm.
NBA All-Star and all that. I enjoy sports, right? But don't stop with just how that Black person entertains you when they're dribbling a ball or what have you, right? Think about the people that they're connected to and where they came from.
Hmm.
Learn more about people and let that inform you as you interact in the world. Because if you go watch a movie, I was listening to another podcast, and one of the people on there, I can't remember which one it was. There's three folks on the podcast. It's Vibe Check is the podcast, and I can't remember
Hmm.
which one of the three folks said it, but had been at the movies and I think went to see The Color Purple or something.
Hmm.
And people were crying. Oh, no, I'm sorry, it wasn't The Color Purple. It was American Fiction.
Okay.
People were sitting in there watching American Fiction and seemed to be very moved by what they were seeing and what they were hearing,
Hmm.
and they walked out of the theater and almost knocked him over. So don't consume during Black History Month, things about Black people and then not treat the Black folks that live down the street from you or work in your office or walk past you on the street some kind of way. Don't consume things about women in March. And oh my gosh, that was a beautiful art. And I just love, whatever it is. Don't consume things about folks in these celebratory months and then go out in the street and treat those very same folks raggedy.
A word.
Yeah.
That is a word.
Yeah.
And it is a Sunday for us, so I'll take
Listen,
that.
listen.
You have been a pleasure. As always, folks, you will have information about how to get in touch with Jocelyn, obviously through her podcast and maybe through LinkedIn, but we'll keep the request to a minimum, especially going into Black History Month. I have managed to find a way to be out of the city for about half of the month. So just know I'm out here. But if you want to get a hold of Jocelyn, please let me know. And thank you. Thank you,
Thank
thank you, thank
you.
you
Thank
so
you.
much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.